Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt. We now turn in our discussion of Leaves of Grass, and more particularly starting from Paumanok to section number 10 out of the some 19 sections of this poem. Now, our assumptions here is that you've already been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, especially the 24 lectures from the inscriptions poems, and then certainly the introductory lecture to starting from Paumanok, and then the previous 9 lectures. I'm going to build on some of the things that we've been saying in those previous lectures as we now turn to what Whitman himself said in 1860 was kind of maybe the heart of the greatnesses, as he called them. And as we get into this discussion, we're going to figure out what he means by this. In earlier poems of starting from Paumanok, he was asking that fundamental question of the essentials. What really matters? And he reduced everything he had to say down to 3 things, which will remind us when we study our T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, that when he was asked about what's the heart of 4 quartets, he went to the fourth section of East Coker, the wounded surgeon plies the steel that questions the distempered part. He said everything about 4 quartets is contained within that. We're going to hear something kind of similar here. Let's read now the poem together and annotate as we go. Now, because this is a little bit longer section, I'm going to not read it all in its entirety because there's so much that we need to say. I'm going to take it line by line, stanza by stanza, and we'll work together. Passage 10. Know you solely to drop in the earth the germs of a greater religion, the following chants, each for its kind, I sing. Now, this know you takes us immediately, obviously, to Whitman and the view of epistemology and what one can know. And as we've said, Whitman will vacillate between sometimes an absolutist epistemology to the fallibilist position of I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. Notice right away this know you kind of information is going to be a continuation then of passages 8 and 9, where so many questions were asked of the student. Now we're going to get some affirmation. The word solely is interesting because it seems like simply, and we're going to come back to this line when we meet in Song of Myself, passage 6, and a child asking, what is the grass? Here notice, know you solely to drop in the earth the germs, obviously leaves of grass immediately comes to mind here, of a greater religion. Go back to passage 9 and what we had to say about that word greater several times. The following chants, C-H-A-N-T-S, again as we pointed out in inscriptions, it's fascinating that when you say out loud the word chants, C-H-A-N-T-S, it sounds like you're actually saying chants as in give me a chance, C-H-A-N-C. It's fascinating the way that word works that way. The following chants, and then each for its kind, that makes you think immediately at 3a of the book of Genesis, right, in the cosmogonic story there. And then the I sing. Now we're going to get that construction again where the I sing comes at the conclusion of lines. In other words, the first thing he says is, my leaves of grass are literally like seeds that I'm throwing out into the ground, and I'm hoping that there will be some kind of growth, right? And that idea of something growing out of the ground and then we come to discover it, that germination kind of motif is central to all of Leaves of Grass. By the way, make a note that in passage 10 here, we're going to meet some powerful symbolism. One of those symbols we've already met now as the seed, right? Then we have a break, and then we get very intimate again with this my comrade. Now, in passage 9 it was camarero, and here it's comrade. This language that we're all in this kind of project together. We cannot help but think of our Dante's Divine Comedy and the role that Virgil plays for Dante as his comrade, his helper, his encourager. Remember from the 24th chapter book of Inferno, up on your feet, this is no time to tire. We're going to get some similar kinds of recognitions here. My comrade, exclamation point, right? He loves these in Leaves of Grass. For you to share with me 2 greatnesses, and I would circle that word if you're working with your own edition. Greatnesses is an interesting word. And a third one, rising, we think of course of the phoenix, right? inclusive, and more resplendent. Now, this just pause because the next line will tell us what those three greatnesses are. Here we come now to the heart of Leaves of Grass. And in 1860, this is exactly what Whitman himself said. If I had to reduce the major themes of Leaves of Grass down to three, it would be, and now we're ready for the next line, the greatness of love. Notice, by the way, these are all capitalized. The greatness of love and democracy and the greatness of religion. So there it is. That is to say, if you want to reduce everything Whitman felt was going on with Leaves of Grass, it is somehow to understand better love, democracy, and the effects of religion, the greatness of religion. Now, we've already talked about religion in earlier lectures. Again, that notion of what it is that you do repetitively as the thing that inspires or causes awe and leads to respect. Democracy for Whitman is a fascinating study. We will read all of Leaves of Grass to try to understand what he means by this term democracy. We're going to go back to texts like John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. The tension between, on the one hand, the individual, and on the other hand, the group. And that tension between the two is going to always be felt when we're studying our Whitman. Now, of course, the word love, anytime that word gets used, as we heard it, earlier when we were talking about the challenges in passage 9, it's a painful thing to love a man or woman. But notice in passage 9, when he uses the word love, it isn't capitalized. Here, of course, capitalization will tell us something significant. It's going to mean something to Whitman. We just got to figure out what that something is, because he's going to be all over the place with that word. Now we'll have a break. He uses the French word mélange, which just simply means to combine, to mix together, and some commingle elements, and these elements are going to be the ones that are listed here. In other words, he's almost picturing himself as the great chemist, mixing together. Right? And we've said that he fancies himself a prophet, a Tiresias-like prophet. We're going to get to some of that, obviously, all the way through Leaves of Grass. But here now he's bringing together elements, I believe, that in the back of his mind, as I was referencing from Genesis, though Genesis 1, each for its kind language, from the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, I think Whitman is playing the game of cosmogonics. That is to say, origination stories, origination ideas, and the mixture that will bring it all together. Mélange my own, the unseen in the seen. This will be the first thing that he says he's going to bring together, right? That is to say, back to our Eidolons lecture in inscriptions, back to our work with Plato's Republic, and especially book 6, 7, the forms theory, and that idea that there's two worlds for Plato. There's the seen, there is the unseen. And of course, that unseen world is more compelling for Plato, and I would argue just as compelling, if not more compelling, for a transcendentalist to transcend from the first box to the second box, as we've said it in other lectures. Here we're going to be playing a similar game, the seen and the unseen. And then he uses another very interesting symbol that we're going to come back to many, many times in Leaves of Grass. He calls it mysterious ocean, where the streams empty. Now, of course, he spent time, Whitman as person, he spent time going down the Mississippi to end up in New Orleans so that he knows about how rivers and oceans meet. And so he's playing a game there. Notice it's mysterious because it's going to produce so much life. And we cannot help but think of that kind of a line in T.S. Eliot's Dry Salvages, right? The river is within us, the sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches, the beaches where it tosses its hints of earlier and other creation, and on it goes, right? Then we meet Tiresias in the next line. Prophetic spirit of materials. And then look at his two ing verbs. Shifting and flickering around me. You've got a very interesting commingled set of images here. You've got fire and you've got potentially snake imagery, which would take us, of course, back to the serpent of the Genesis 3 account. I think the Genesis 1, 2, 3 account is very much a part of what's going on here in this passage. Prophetic spirit of material shifting and flickering around me. Living beings. Identities now doubtless, again the fallibilist epistemological position, near us in the ear that we know not of. Now, this idea that we know not of is, directly kind of language that we will have heard in our Shakespeare, as we're talking about the Hamlet Act 3 soliloquy, the to be or not to be soliloquy, right? We'll see this construction several times. In other words, there's a whole lot of stuff that's mysterious, that's unclear. That's part of his melange, part of that mixture that he's bringing together to create his Leaves of Grass. He continues, contact daily and hourly that will not release me. That is to say, there's a certain idea of the essence, but I want to go to Pushkin's Prophet, and I think there's a lot to be said of studying Pushkin's Prophet, the poem, The Prophet, as it relates specifically to what he's arguing here. There's something inside of me that's got a hold of me, and I can't get away from it. I've got to say some things about it. I have to keep going, right? And he says it this way, these selecting all these elements coming together, these in hints, again the fallibilist position being suggested, demanded of me. In other words, I don't have a choice. This following, obviously, the logic of the Declaration of Independence. We do not have a choice when in the course of human events it becomes necessary, right? That idea that I do not have a choice. This is to some degree a defense, right? I have to say the things that I'm burning, flickering to say. And then he continues with the next stanza. Not he, with a daily kiss, onward from childhood, kissing me, has wended and twisted around me that which holds me to him. Now this twisting, serpentine-like language obviously makes us think of our Milton's Paradise Lost, but it also makes us think of the Genesis 3 account, right? Notice the interesting construction with the not he, and then who is the antecedent to the pronoun he? With a daily kiss onward from childhood kissing me. Now, this idea of the child and the relationship of the child as someone who is a care provider, we're going to see this a number of times. I mentioned Song of Myself, passage 6. We're going to see this a number of times in Leaves of Grass, so we want to be paying attention to it. Notice how it's winding around and it's twisting around me, that which holds me to him. And then we're back to this. Who is this individual or this persona that's being referenced here? Not he, any more than I am held to the heavens and all the spiritual world after what they, again, these are interesting pronouns. What are the antecedents to these? They have done to me. The they, of course, are the elements here that he's talking about. Suggesting, and again, the fallibilist position, right? Suggesting themes. Now, that's the centerpiece, of course, of the heart of this poem. What are the major essentials? What are the greatnesses that will be these suggesting themes? Obviously, love, democracy, and religion, right? Oh, such themes. He'll say it again to finish this poem. He'll use the dash, of course, to sound and look very much like Emily Dickinson. And then he uses the word equalities with an exclamation point. Oh, divine average with an exclamation point. He loves this notion of equalities, that is to say the inclusivity of his language, and then he loves this referencing of the divine average. There is something compelling that holds all humans together. He'll call it the soul many times, jot it in your notes, and as we see this, we'll come back to it. And then another powerful symbol of the bird song, warblings under the sun, and then he uses the elided verb of ushered as now, or at noon, or setting, in other words, all day long. Strains musical, and then we're back to the imagery of the ocean and the river, flowing through ages, now reaching hither. And this will sound very much like so many of the poems from inscriptions as we looked at it. In other words, Whitman wants to argue there has been something coming for a really, really long time, and it finally culminates now with me and with you, the American people, and the readers of Leaves of Grass. He says, take to your reckless and composite chords, and there is a lot of that in Leaves of Grass. It is reckless, it is composite, it will capture everything. It's pretty much what we have said about all the other great epics that we've studied together, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, the Divine Comedy, of course, Paradise Lost, that they assume so much. They're overwhelming. They're like waves that just keep kind of hitting us and knocking us off of our equilibrium. Here we're going to have something very similar happening. And of course, Whitman was accused of being reckless a time or two, obviously, in the criticisms that came to him regarding Leaves of Grass. I take to your reckless and composite chords, add to them. In other words, I'm going to go beyond anything that's happened before. And, he loves this word, cheerfully pass them forward. In other words, there's more to come after me, as we have said in poems like Poets to Come. There's this sense that Whitman has that I'm only beginning something that's going to get kick-started now, but man, oh man, is it coming. There's going to be some great things coming. Now let's finish at 2a. We don't want to overlook it. The greatnesses, as he will call them, the key core elements. If we are reading Leaves of Grass and we need some kind of spine, and many scholars have, of course, pointed this out. If you need a spine to be able to hold everything, the backbone that holds everything together, it's love, democracy, and religion. You'll find the ways in which he dances with and around and sometimes against those, which is why we love to say in 303, we are the stories that we tell and retell. We're also the stories that we decide to either accept or reject. Notice how Whitman will play with all three of these throughout Leaves of Grass. These are, of course, really the fundamentals of Leaves of Grass. At 2b, well, we mentioned all the symbolism here. It's quite a remarkable set of lines. I mean, you've got germination with seeds happening, the leaves of grass. You have oceans and rivers and the flowing. You have the fire and the flickering and the potentiality of snakes and even the snake's tongue. And obviously you have the issue of birds and the warblings that will happen along with songs and chants. So you've got all kinds of interesting symbolism happening at the very beginning of Leaves of Grass through this passage. Now, while I have made a number of references to other texts in 3a here, I'm simply going to comment on 2. Obviously, the Bible here in Genesis 1. I think it's an important one. Go back and read the first chapter of Genesis and then pick up this section and read it again and just get a sense of it. Even the language itself is quite remarkable. As it's clear, Whitman is playing the game of creation. Cosmogonic kind of story. I'm building something here. But of course, I also want to mention Dante's Divine Comedy, and our comments on that can be found at learnstrong.net. And the importance of Virgil. The importance of the comrade. To have somebody there to help you get through the experience, because what is it that Dante's Divine Comedy teaches? You don't go to hell, you go through hell, right? If you're Dante the Pilgrim. Finally, at 3b, as we try to own this material for ourselves, love, democracy, and religion. Are these essentials for you? I mean, are they foundational for you? Are they the thing around which you build your life? It's an interesting question, and maybe one that, you know, Walt's going to continue to challenge us to consider, right? Especially as he elucidates what he means in the walking passage, as it's sometimes referred to in passage number 11 of Starting from Paumanok. Let's go on a walk with Walt, shall we? Thank you.